Thank you, Vice President Haneda, for your a little too much exaggerated introduction. Not for our group, but myself. I'm truly honored to moderate at this historic event today. For the last 20 years, Northeast Asia has been facing new normals in every aspect. First of thing is rise of or ascendancy of China, which has became the predominant element in this area. So now we are talking on the some traps, regarding rise of China. That is Thucydides trap, and Kinderberger's trap, and even a middle-income trap. So these questions will provide food for thought for our further discussion tomorrow and after. And the second, new normals is decline of democracy, as discussed even the previous session. So, and on top of that, we are really faced with illiberal, democracy and new forms of populism. So, and the third new normal is proliferation of WMDs. U.S. and North Korea has made landmarking summit in Singapore last year, but the failure of the Hanoi summit last February shed a murky cloud on the prospect of achieving our common goal of complete denuclearization. The last one is some unprecedented inflection of the new global economy, which is driven by scientific innovation. Especially, I'd like to draw your attention to the element of the on the aspect on the name of the impact of scientific innovation on geopolitical risk. So these issues could be thoroughly discussed. If I try to pick up three common denominators, penetrating these new normals, that might be uncertainty, unpredictability, and unsustainabilities. So Tokyo Forum will place as a good knowledge platform to solve these new challenges. Fortunately, we have 5 global stars in this area. So maybe 2 from United States, 1 from China and Japan and Korea, respectively. I will give forward to American, leaders, not because they are superpowers, but because they had to fly over more than 15 hours. So as a courtesy to the longest. So when I'd like, before I, I give the floor to these 2 big shot. I will give some introduction for these 2 scholars. Mr. Fuller served as a founder and the president of Heritage Foundation. Can you imagine? For 37 years, from 1977 through 2013, and then he returned very temporarily. But without, he has no official title, a government title. And even he doesn't have any title as a professor. Am I right? Right. It's amazing how he could transform the small talk shop into, big main think tank for the, conservative lines. So it's amazing. There are too many, adjectives describe him. And if I say, I should make first step here. And then if I introduce John Hamney, now he's working as a incumbent president of CSIS. He is, if my memory is correct, you're also Republican, okay? Yeah, but to my surprise, he served. He spent most of his high-level governmental service under the Republican Democratic president, including deputy defense secretary and also head of defense policy board for consecutive 4 or 5 defense secretary. So so that's why I could fully trust that CSIS is really bipartisan, because he, even though he is a Republican, but he served for Democrats. So, but as you enjoy, they have a little different nuance in current U.S. foreign policies. So that's why I invited two giants at the beginning, which you will provide good proper thought for further discussion. Okay, let's give big hands for Dr. Fuller. Okay.
Thank you very much, my dear friend, Ambassador Park. It is indeed an honor to be back in Tokyo. And for my colleague, John Hamry, I remind him that in 1965, when I first went to Washington after several graduate schools, my first place was at CSIS. And I am very, very proud to say that I remain a CSIS alum and very proud of it. I also would just say, in terms of Tokyo specifically, 1981, Ronald Reagan was just inaugurated as president. He invited me as the president of Heritage to take a delegation to Tokyo to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the signing of the U.S.-Japanese Mutual Defense Treaty. Our delegation was led by former President Gerald Ford. We had several former cabinet members with us in that delegation, and it was a very moving experience for us both to celebrate that occasion, but also to remember what brought us together here. In subsequent years, of course, I've had the opportunity to return to Tokyo many times, to visit Seoul many times, and to always stress in all three capitals, Washington, Tokyo, and Seoul, that we cannot let any political differences come between the three of us. And I sincerely congratulate you, Ambassador Park and Chairman Che, for bringing Korea and Japan together here at the University of Tokyo, because Korea and Japan have to be together with the United States in Northeast Asia as much as possible and in every possible way. You're right, Ambassador Park. I am a Republican. I'm a proud Trump Republican. And I want to say a few things about President Trump and what his leadership right now in America means, not only for America, not only for Northeast Asia, our assignment, but what it means in terms of trying to understand a Trump foreign policy. Now that we're 3.5 years into the Trump administration, I think I'm finally beginning to understand what a Trump foreign policy is, although some mornings I wake up and he surprises me with some new component of a Trump foreign policy. But let me say something very specifically about this president. If you read his speeches, particularly at the United Nations General Assembly in several years, and his September 2017 speech in Warsaw, where he talks about what America represents, you'll have a good idea of what the underlying vision of this president and his foreign policy really is. When President Trump talks about his foreign policy, whether he's talking at the United Nations or whether he's talking to an enthusiastic pro-Trump rally of 55,000 people in somewhere, Kentucky or Louisiana or someplace. He talks about America first, but he's very careful. He never says America only. He talks about America and about America having a role in the world and America working with its allies. It didn't always come out that way in the early days of the Trump administration. I remember a dinner conversation one time with former Defense Secretary Don Rumsfeld. He related to me that he said, Ed, for 3 years I was America's ambassador to NATO and twice I was the Secretary of Defense. He said I would go around every capital of Europe and I'd say the Europeans have to spend more money on our defense, they have to make a larger contribution to NATO. He said the only result I ever had was I put a lot of dinner guests to sleep with the length of my speech. He said now Donald Trump says it and the whole world erupts. Well, except when Donald Trump was sworn into office, there were 4 of NATO's 25 members that were actually making their commitment at the 2% level that had been agreed upon by NATO. That's now up to 9, and the total aggregate number is something like $100 billion more that has been raised from America's allies in terms of joint defense throughout the whole NATO structure. And I mention NATO because, in a way, it's kind of neutral between what's going on between the United States and Korea right now and the United States and Japan in terms of defense demands. The other area that I would talk about in terms of Trump's foreign policy that I think is of special interest, particularly with my friend from China, is where we are with our relationship, particularly the economic negotiations with China right now. I had the opportunity in July to speak at a conference in Hong Kong immediately after the Osaka summit here, where we hoped that President Trump and President Xi would come together in resolving some of our trade disputes. I went to this conference and gave the first American speech, kind of set the tone because I was probably the most outspoken pro-Trump person from the American side. But I pointed out that it was not necessarily going to be resolved very soon for 2 reasons. Number one, China and the United States have a fundamentally different understanding of what we call Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the U.S. Constitution of 232 years ago, which gives us patent rights, rights to intellectual property that is sacrosanct in the American system and that is willfully disregarded on too many occasions by our friends in Beijing, and that is one of the main points of contention. The other point of contention that I mentioned at that time that's now getting some more significant attention, including within the last 2 or 3 days from officials at the World Bank, is that China basically can't have it both ways, and President Trump has made this point repeatedly now. It cannot be both the number 2 economy in the world and at the same time still be a developing economy, because a developing economy, by the very definition of it, gets certain concessions from World Trade Organizations, from the World Trade Organization and from the World Bank in terms of subsidized loans and in terms of in WTO not having to live up to all the agreements. And there is a specific definition for what constitutes a developing country. That is, once you reach $6,900 per capita in GDP per year, you graduate from that. Korea has graduated from that. Alas, and of course Japan has never been in it. China now with $10,000 per person pretty clearly should have graduated from it, and if they intend to be number 2 in the world, they clearly should be, and they shouldn't be getting subsidized loans. And this again is a point of contention between the United States and China that has a ways to go before it's going to be reconciled, I'm afraid. I say all this as a predicate to two certain factors, and then I will stop and look forward to a lively exchange. And that first factor is that the United States is a long-time presence in North Asia. It will continue to be a long-time presence in North Asia. We've been here, we'll stay here, and we believe in it very much. We believe very strongly in our bilateral relationships, both here with Japan and across the sea with the Republic of Korea. We believe, frankly, in the terms that have been outlined in the Taiwan Relations Act. That never makes my friends from the PRC very happy, but I remind them that it is a law on the books that's been there now for more than 40 years, and it will continue to be there. But the United States is in North Asia, it will stay in North Asia, and it will remain committed to a peaceful North Asia. We will get into, I'm sure, discussions about what we can do or what will happen about the nuclear situation with regard to the DPRK. But I just close on the notion that I'm very happy again, Ambassador, that you and your colleagues are holding this jointly sponsored conference by two such prestigious organizations as the Che Institute and the University of Tokyo here in Japan. Thank you.
Thank you for your very eloquent elucidation on President Trump's major policies. But I have some I'd like to raise one question. What's behind raising such astronomical amount of burden sharing, vis-a-vis South Korea? So maybe there's some speculation that he knows that this is unreasonable, request. So with some expectation that there will be far short, final compromise, and then such kind of falling short might be used as a good excuse or pretext to further, ground forces reduction in Korea. So, and then second thing is there might be that kind of extraordinary, request might be work as a preemptive, signals, preparing for further continued negotiation with Japan and Europe. So, what is your comment?
President Trump, as you rightly imply, Mr. Ambassador, is a negotiator, coming from the private sector, not from the government, not from the military. He always believes in tough negotiations. I think that, frankly, when his negotiators sit down concretely with our friends in Seoul and talk through what the new level of assistance, what the new level of payment from Korea to the United States, I believe it'll be worked out. It will not be anywhere near the $5 billion level that he's talking about. The new camp that the Koreans have paid for and that pulls together American troops, Camp Humphrey, is a marvelous facility that we are certainly proud of and the Koreans are proud of. It's an opening gambit in a negotiating, I believe, and I do not think in any way, shape, or form it indicates an inclination to want to pull out any of our 28,500 troops. Our President Trump has been to Korea. He's spoken to the the General Assembly. He's been to the DMZ. He knows it. He knows the Korean situation. Vice President Pence has been there, and our relationship is very, very close and solid. And it is likewise here with Japan. He likes sometimes, I think, to throw down some of these numbers and see what I won't say see what he can get away with, but see what the response is so that the negotiations can continue from that point on. But I think he will leave it to the professionals, to Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Esper and others to come up with a good deal that's fair to everybody.
Thank you. So, just in one sentence, there's some crystal clear decoupling between burden sharing and ground forces issues.
I don't think they are connected, correct.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Dr. John Hamney. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, you and Chairman Che. I'm very flattered to be included, and thank you. And I'm very pleased to follow Ed Fullner. I've followed Ed Fullner for 35 years, I want you all to know. But I'm very proud to say he's my mentor, teacher, and also my friend, and I'm very grateful for that. I don't want to frighten you. I'm going to make 15 observations, but they're only about 2 sentences each, so please don't be worried about that. Number one, when President Obama announced the so-called pivot to Asia, there were many of us that were disappointed. Of course, there wasn't a lot of content to that, but it did represent one very important thing. It was the first time in 340 years of American history when we said Asia was our first priority, not Europe. Right? Number two, while Russia has returned to become a problem for both Europe and for the United States, there is a very solid consensus in the United States that Asia is our most important strategic theater and that the rise of China is the most important strategic development of this century. Number three, for 40 years, the prevailing consensus in the United States was the Nixon-Kissinger consensus that we should positively engage China, bring it into the international community, and that we would have kind of an evolution of fairly benign relations with China. That saw its culmination when Bob Zellick gave his speech, the responsible stakeholder speech, 15 years ago. That era is over. That's gone. That no longer represents a consensus in the United States. Number four, even though that consensus is gone, there is no unified theory right now in the US about China. There are factions that have different perspectives about it, but there's no unified view about China right now in the United States. Number five, I think there is a consensus in the US that China is actively championing an alternative economic model designed to promote China's political interests. And that model is a much more aggressive use of economic forces to intimidate neighbors, constrain investors, and to advance Chinese champion companies. Number six, the debate in the United States there are 2 camps, basically. One camp thinks that we need to confront China in every possible way. We're going to fight World War III against China, we better get ready. That's one camp. The other camp believes that China is not going to change its policy choices because we don't like them, and therefore America needs to improve its capacity to compete effectively in the world. Number 7. There is a very solid bipartisan consensus in the Congress that China is competing unfairly in economic terms and that the United States has to actively work against that. Number 8, there are some voices in the Trump administration that argue for decoupling, but I do not think that represents a broad public consensus in the United States. There is a broad public consensus that China imposes unfair restrictions in competition and that America needs to take specific steps to deal with that. Number 9, the Trump administration has a confusing agenda in Asia. It has decided to confront China, but at the same time, it abandoned the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It challenges China, but at the same time challenges our 2 strongest allies in the region, Japan and Korea. We announced we're for a free and open Indo-Pacific, but in reality we walked away from we were confronting our strongest allies. So it's a confusing policy agenda. Number 10, while President Trump has created some ambiguity, the American public has become more supportive of alliances and rule-based trading regime than any time in history. The support for a trading regime is now 70% with American voters. It's very strong. And allies are at equal number. So even though the administration has had some confusion, American public has really become quite much more supportive. Number 11, Japan has become the leader of the democratic community in Asia. When we abandoned TPP, Prime Minister Abe embraced it. He moved forward with a regional trade framework. Japan is the welcome senior partner in Asia for democracy. Number 12, Japan did a masterful job of the G20 Osaka summit. It was a tour de force by the Gaimsho, and it championed two extremely important policy initiatives that are important to all of us. One was high-quality infrastructure development throughout Asia, and the second was an open internet environment with data security. Two very, very important initiatives. Number 13, Japan, more broadly speaking, Japan has developed a sophisticated strategy for dealing with the rise of China. The United States would be well served to follow Japan's lead. Number 14, about North Korea. It's now clear that North Korea has no intention to give up nuclear weapons. I think that we understand where that is. We should stand strongly with Japan and South Korea and not be intimidated by this. North Korea only has three options. One is to stay where they are now, keep their nuclear weapons, continue to decline as an economic force. Number two, an option is to become absorbed by China and be a poor province within China. Or number three, to abandon nuclear weapons, find a very prosperous future by unifying with Korea. And those are their choices. And we shouldn't, there's no fourth choice, so let's not get confused. And number 15, and I'll be very brief, and this is a word about the Korea-Japan relations. I understand the bitter history, I really do. And there's no way to minimize the tragedy of that history. But there's nothing I can do personally to change the past. But I can do something to change the future. And the future really does depend on Korea and Japan stepping past those differences to find the cooperation with each other in mutual security. And it's in our interest, the United States' interest, to help make that possible. There's some very important developments, in the last couple of weeks, and we need to build on that so that we've got a constructive future. Thank you very much, Inko.
Thank you. On U.S.-China trade war, there might be two schools who is supporting reformation of Chinese industry. The second school is, supporting complete decoupling between U.S. and China. So, I got some sense that you might be a little, supportive, a little leaning to reformation position. So I don't know, but one of my lingering question is, there might be some speculation that Trump will eventually try to a small deal or small package so that he could declare a victory with the U.S.-China trade war before the election. So maybe, do you support that kind of?
Well, first, let me just say, my personal view is we're not going to intimidate China to change its direction, that it has decided for itself is best for its economic future. We're not going to change that. America does need to improve its capacity to compete, and we do need to protect ourselves, against state capitalism. So I think there are things we need to do ourselves. We're not likely going to change China's trajectory. On the decoupling issue, I personally don't think that you're going to see widespread decoupling. You're seeing an economic disengagement in certain sectors because the price of labor has gotten high in China and companies move to other locations. But I don't personally think you're going to see a decoupling from, between our two economies.
Thank you. Excuse me. Next speaker will be Professor Zhang Wenling. He's an academy member of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and he's also president of China Association of Asia Pacific Studies. He has many titles, but he is a well-known architect who has very actively involved in many important national plan, especially in the area of the development of new policies. And then he are maintaining as a good relationship, and then he provide very good advice to incumbent Chinese political leaders. So let's send a big hand to Professor Zhang.
Thank you, Chairman. Talk about Northeast Asia, I think the region experiencing, I call it a grand transformation. If we recall the region in modern time, in modern history, the first grand transformation was Japan's rise. So Japan's rise significantly, strikingly changed the regional relations and order with the war with, many sufferings. The second grand transformation is Second World War, post-Second World War, Cold War, or also post-Cold War. So this complex transformation, generally, I think, the first caused a Korean War. It's really great suffering. But after that, generally, I may call it a risk, a peace, or vulnerable peace. So we are still in this in period of time. But the new grand transformation is China's rise. So I could probably it's called the third grand transformation in modern time. China's rise has changed the power structure, power relations, and it's a lot of things that we are facing. Usually, that's a big power's rise cause wars. That is the history of the region. But the situation is facing us, whether we can prevent from it happen again in the region. So there are many challenges facing the region now. One, I think, is a key matter is how to accept and adopt the China's rise. And the China is different with a different system, different culture, or probably to some extent is civilization. So we see a different. So how to accommodate this kind of rise? That's a big challenge, I think. The second one, that is emergent China-US strategic competition. I think it's also it's a big thing. How to manage? China-US had a Korean War. They, we have questioned us whether we have again or can avoid it. The third big challenge, I think, is DPRK's nuclear issue. How to manage, how to find a way to solve it peacefully rather than in a, war case or other confrontal means. The first one, also very important, how to restructure, remake China, Japan, Korea economic foundation. In the past several decades, China, Korea, Japan formulated a very close economic network, and which become a leading force to East Asia, to Asia Pacific. But now, this kind of relationship is facing big challenges with many reasons. So whether three countries can remake this kind of new relation under the new situation based on the new technology in the new environment. So many challenges, I think. Among all these big challenges, the key is that the peace, no war again in the region. I think that's the first priority thing we have to consider, we have to manage. About China, I think, as I mentioned, China is different. It's a different emerging big power. But China itself, I think, it needs stability, needs peace. But at the same time, China hesitates to accept existing relationship and order. So it hopes to change it. So what kind of relationship and order, what China can make, I think is not by itself. It's by the overall partners which we make together, as I mentioned. The second one, I think personally, I hope everybody believes and China will continue to insist peace and development strategy on the road, because China does not need or hope a war. Otherwise, China, any leaders in the future or current cannot realize its dream to make China great again. So also I think the great difference I mentioned recently in various conferences compared to the past history, the big powers competition ended by the wars. But in the modern time, with many reasons, many nuclear weapons, disastrous technology, and so on, so make big powers not possible to afford a war. So I called it probably strategic competition for advantage without a real war. So this kind of a new situation brings about new opportunities because they need to make dialogue. They need also cooperation because no one part, including China, the United States, can afford a big war again. So this probably one big hope for us, how to use this kind of new opportunity. It's different from the past history. So we should use some new ideas to build the new the future. Lastly, relating Northeast Asia, I think we have seen so many problems among the Northeast Asia countries. The bad country-to-country relationship and declining economic growth and some disputes and so on. But so for China, Japan, Korea, I think key thing is how to, for the region as in large, how to come out of the history, come out of the existing situation, looking for the future. Some good news, for instance, though China, Korea, Japan, three countries have many problems among their relationship, but the cooperation dialogue continues. So this month, the CJK leaders meeting will be happened in China, Chongqing. So they talk about the cooperation, and rather than talk about the confrontation. So this is some good hope. And actually, I'm attending another meeting at the same time, which I initiated, China, Korea, Japan cooperation dialogue. So in the morning session, we found so many things we can do together. It's possible, not just stand at differences. So searching for commons and cooperations. This is probably a way to move out of the history and also existing situation. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you for your for your sharing on your vision for the future shaping in terms of peace among three countries. At the same time, I have one questions on strategic competition without leading war. Yesterday, I think exactly last week, we got a very interesting Brookings Institute report on North Korea, especially China's relation with North Korean denuclearization. The article implied that Beijing is trying to reset of the ties with Pyongyang. China's post on North Korea is shifting, including signs that it is prepared to live with a nuclear North Korea. The common goal of denuclearization that once inspired the US-China cooperation on North Korea is maybe disappearing. So uncertain times lie ahead. So, I don't believe this might reflect any Chinese, official position, but if possible, you can, I hope you could make any comment on such argument.
For my observation, I think the red line or bottom line, that China will not accept a nuclear North Korea at all. But there are some domestic debates or rethinking because, the worsening China-US relationship, some people try to rethink what we have gained in the past, closely cooperated with the United States, give high pressure on North Korea because we almost cut off all the relationships with North Korea. So for this kind of understanding, probably there are some flexible arrangements. But if you see, China still keeps its hard policy for UN sanctions rather than, the bilateral one adopted by others, hesitate to accept that. But UN sanctions still the, basic lines which China now insists. So there are two, I think, hopes. One is if, for instance, US, North Korea could make a deal, China would support, we're not against it. So I think that's still, I think one very clear message. The second one, I think China continue to support, if any kind of collective cooperations, actions among the partners to press North Korea to move forward. The problem is now, is all the signs is not clear. Which in the past, we are solely rely on the personal relationships. So just, 1 or 2 days ago, we received a different message. President Trump no longer talk about the close friend and talk about the, possible wars and so on. The North Korea reflected very sharply. So I think currently there are some great risk. So we could not afford to let the situation go to confront it. So we still need something, drain the situation back. So I think that's China's interest. I don't think official policy will change that basic line that a non-nuclear peninsula, we called it. But the key issue, still the DPRK's nuclear capacity.
Sorry for my second question on that issue. The problem is, what if US and North Korea failed to reach any agreement in terms of denuclearization? In that case, maybe bloody nose might be one of the possible scenario. But the other scenario might be, the complete failure of denuclearization in Korea might give, that is not my government position. I mean, there is not no my personal position, but there is some report that in that case, such failures of negotiation will lead Japan and Korea to go nuclear. So which might be triggering the horrible chain reaction of proliferation of nuclear armament. So what do you think of it?
As I mentioned, that non-nuclear peninsula, non-nuclear South Korea and Japan is still, I think, basic, I think, understandings for all the partners, including China and the United States. So that is why I said we need a collective effort to create an atmosphere. Also, we need some new thinking, how to get these things on agenda. For instance, we all realize there is no once-for-all package for denuclearization. We understand a step-by-step approach. So how to arrange this, how much we can accept, that's rely on negotiations. So however, we have to give some rooms for North Korea and to go move forward. Step-by-step approach, I think the first thing, probably we need to ice capacity, nuclear capacity. And then as a starting, and back to IAEA and observations, inspections, and so on, not to give a committee to give all. So with the, complementary other arrangements and, lift of the part of the sanctions. So the things, the critical thing is let it move. Now it's standby. And there is an election in the United States. There is an urgent, summer demand for North Korea to see some result, to its deadline announced. So what happened after that if nothing happened? It may be, I think, back to the confrontation, but how to drag the situation back. So this coming weeks, these two gentlemen have a great influence to current government, to President Trump. I think we should have some ways to go forward. Thank you.
I hope Giant will have some great influence. Next speaker will be Ambassador Fujisaki Ichiro. He's former ambassador to United States and also UN at Geneva and the WTO. He served as a deputy minister for foreign affairs, and he also served as a personal representative of Japanese Prime Minister Koizumi to the G8 summit for several years. So maybe the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I was a diplomat, as you said, but 7 years ago, I stepped down. And on that day, I said to my wife, now I can say anything. My wife said, but dear, no one cares anymore. I'm sorry. I was in United States too long, so I feel like I have to start my remarks by jokes. But thank you very much for inviting me, Prime Minister Lee Hong, Ambassador Park, and Chain Student, Tokyo University. Now, the dull panel is something that everyone agrees. So I will be very, I think, provocative in a way. You asked 3 questions: US, China, democracy, and North Korea. On US, China, I am grateful to both President Xi Jinping and President Trump. President Xi, why? Because Deng Xiaoping's idea was to hide the nail and teeth until China really becomes strong. But President Xi defied that preach of Deng and showed that China has a dream of 2049, manufacturing 2025, South China Sea. Now everyone is alarmed. He pushed the alarm bell himself. We all woke up. Why? It's not because he tried to do that with goodwill, but he had no option than to do it because there's frustration in the country. He had to encourage nationalism. That's how I read it. It's not the government of Japan's reading, sir. It's my reading. And so I'm grateful to President Shin. Why President Trump? Because everyone says that U.S. has now understood that China is becoming a rival. 5 years ago, no, they were not saying it. It's because of President Trump. And now everyone is on the board. So even when Peter Navarro or Michael Pillsbury was writing a book, Heritage, or Hudson was writing a report, not all the Americans were on board. Now it's so. So I am thanking, but I am not saying that I'm belligerent or antagonistic to China. It's a very important friend. I'm very happy that President Xi is coming to Japan next year in spring. We have to really take that opportunity to improve our relations. But why I'm saying it? Because I'm happy that we are not becoming Rip Van Winkle, in Japanese, Urashima Taro. If we were not woken up 30 years ago, if we are not waking up now, in 30 years, if we wake up, we will see that China is the dominating 7Gs or 8Gs or military or economy, but now we know that. And now I think China is learning as well, if I may say, that they cannot push the road this way. They will be adjusting. And the both sides will try to find how to adjust. That's the most important thing now. Second, on democracy, I think if there's no weight limitation in wrestling or boxing, of course the heavyweights will win all the championships. So in the country, there's a taxation, like progressive tax or inheritance tax and national school system like this. However, in the world, there's nothing. And WTO says everything has to be treated equal. If that's so, the most high productive country will dominate. That's what is happening. And things has to be adjusted. So I think it's a time of adjustment. If you let all the refugees and foreigners influx, then there'll be no government can be very sure of security. So I think there has to be some control. So, but not there's some balance between control and freedom, and that's what we are seeking now. I think what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the US, elsewhere, is that we are now the time of adjustment. North Korea, very short. Two things I'm worried. When they launch middle-range missile over Japan, Tepodon or Nodon, or coming to our territorial sea, and if our friend country's leader says, I don't care about if he tweets that, I don't care about it because it doesn't come to us. That's the end of trust relations between us. That's one. Second is, if US tries to accept easy deal, not leading way to CVIED, complete, verifiable nuclear destruction, and just accept freeze, then that's the worst case too. So I think it's time for us to hold together US, Republic of Korea, China, and Japan, and not let that happen. That's how I look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. You touched on some concern on the North Korean nuclear and missile capabilities. And you also have some great, specified easy deal, small deal, whatever, which could be real concern of Korea and Japan. So maybe if we extend your debate on that gist, the conclusion might be as follows: how we can trust the reliability of extended deterrence by United States. So is there any probability, the same concern as Europe had during the Cold War? So maybe in what moment we could be faced with that concern, solidly? Okay?
Deterrence is belief. It's words and deeds. So no unnecessary word should be uttered. That is the key. If someone says, hey, I'm not going there because it's far from me, the deterrence, extended deterrence is over. So we just hope that this will not happen. And our two good American friends will convey that to their leaders.
Thank you for your very simple answers to that delicate question. The last speaker will be Professor Yoon Young-Kwan, Emeritus at Seoul National University. He served as a foreign minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And he also co-chair of the East Asia Vision Group, from 2011 to 2012. So,
thank you very much. It's my great pleasure and honor to speak in this very prestigious university, Tokyo University. I think it's very timely and important to have this kind of conference. And I would like to express my deep gratitude to Chairman Che Tae-won and Ambassador Park for inviting me. And I also am grateful to the Japanese organizers who prepared this wonderful event. I think we are nowadays living in a unique period in history. What used to be unthinkable 5 years ago or 10 years ago seem to be occurring on a weekly basis nowadays. And many of these developments are causing concerns and confusions and anxieties all over the world. And I would like to mention just two topics briefly. One is the US-China competition, and the other is North Korea nuclear issue. Tension is rising in many areas, such as trade, finance, investment, Taiwan issue, or a cyber issue, or space competition, etc., etc. And the current state of bilateral relationship is well revealed in the 2017 U.S. National Security Strategy. That publication called engagement of China mostly a failure and charged it, quote, China seeks to displace the US in the Indo-Pacific region, expand the reaches of its state-driven economic model, and reorder the region in its favor, unquote. It seems to me that the current US-China competition continues to intensify. I think it will turn out to be a war of attrition without much gain for both sides. First, the US has various advantages over China in areas such as military power, technology, economic efficiency, alliance networks, and soft power. However, the alliances and soft power are being shaken in the recent few years because of its foreign policy based on bilateralism and transactional approach based on a narrowly defined definition of national interest. In addition, it doesn't seem to have a strategic framework. Instead of withdrawing from TPP, it would have been much more effective if the US had remained in TPP and made a coalition of like-minded countries to pressure China to play a fair game in international economic transactions. Second, China will neither be a winner. Its economic situation is not good. I think it deserted a time-old, very important Deng Xiaoping's foreign policy guideline: hide your strengths and bide your time too early. China has been pursuing a more muscular foreign policy since around 2008 global financial crisis, and its politics is returning to time-old authoritarianism and losing ideological flexibility, and its economy is not good either. It is experiencing a much lower economic growth, and they are facing inefficiencies of state-owned companies, and they are also facing decreasing labor force due to democratic changes. After all, I think we have just begun to drift into the leaderless world. The US seems to be tired of exercising leadership and unwilling to do so, while China is not willing to take a responsible leadership role in the global political economy. The situation, I'm worried, is becoming quite similar to the world in the 1930s. The world of a leadership vacuum, which was very well explained by the famous economic historian Charles Kindleberger in his seminal book, The World in Depression, 1929 to 1939. The old leader, Great Britain, had the will but no capacity to exercise leadership, while the new power, the US, had the capability but no will to lead. So the result we know all, Great Depression and World War II. One positive thing is that the US and China have been able to cooperate on the issue of denuclearizing North Korea. President Trump and President Xi Jinping could cooperate on this since about 2 years ago. And but nowadays I'm concerned what will happen if this kind of competitive atmosphere in various areas between two big powers spill over into the North Korean nuclear issue. And if China defects from international coalition of sanctioning North Korea, then probably the North Korean nuclear situation will be out of control. And now I'd like to talk briefly on the North Korean nuclear issue. The key issue related to North Korean nuclear quagmire is Chairman Kim Jong-un's concern for regime survival. Some people say that North Korea would never give up their nuclear weapons. That is, their nuclear weapon is a kind of independent variable. But I think somewhat differently. I think for Chairman Kim Jong-un, independent variable is regime survival, not nuclear development. In other words, I think he may sell out his program if he thinks the cost of having nuclear weapons far exceeds the benefit of having it in terms of his own regime survival. I think his security concern is understandable. Even the leader of China, which is far greater than North Korea, could begin to concentrate on their economic development only after a very favorable international environment, security environment was prepared through diplomatic normalization with United States in 1979. In this regard, I think the traditional pressure-only approach toward North Korea cannot work. It should be supplemented by a political approach, that is, engaging North Korea politically through dialogues and try to mitigate their security concern and weaken their incentive to develop nuclear weapons. That is why I support President Trump's decision to meet Chairman Kim Jong-un last year. Despite the relatively poor results of the recent two summits with Chairman Kim Jong-un, still I think President Trump's decision for political engagement of North Korea, if prudently implemented, would raise the chance for a diplomatic solution of the nuclear problem. As of now, I think the best option, if possible, would be a reasonable small deal between the US and North Korea. This may make a gradual but meaningful start of the long-term process of complete denuclearization. In order to make this deal, I think North Korea should agree on complete denuclearization as a final goal and definition of and roadmap for denuclearization. Kim Jong-un should be also realistic and be ready to exchange a partial denuclearization with a partial lifting of economic sanction. On the other hand, the US needs to accept simultaneous action-for-action approach in terms of implementing denuclearization while continuing its political engagement of North Korea. If they can strike a deal like this, I think it would mean the Chairman Kim Jong-un may be forced to transform his own leadership style domestically from a totalitarian despot to an authoritarian dictator, like North Korea's Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s. The Korean Peninsula situation will improve much. Internationally, the US would become a very important partner for denuclearized North Korea, which will also benefit the US strategic interest from a long-term perspective. There may be 2 or 3 alternatives to this, probably less brighter alternative than this, but I'd like to stop here. Thank you.
I got a warning that the time is up. But from my calculation, we have 4 more minutes. So I will give 1 minute for for your last comment or additional question or whatever. Just 1 minute, for everybody.
Okay. My only immediate comment is to my good friend John Hamry that yes, we did pull out of the TPP, but we did in fact negotiate a very improved U.S.-Korea bilateral trade relationship, and are in the process of doing the same with Japan, and we remain very much committed economically, of course, to East Asia.
Thank you.
And in the process, we've implemented about 70% of TPP. We should get the last 30%. I wanted to say again how much I've admired Japan's leadership on behalf of democracies in Asia. This under the Abe administration, it's been very valuable for the United States, and I do hope we come back and we do full TPP, and I hope that we come back as a full and trusted partner in the region. Thank you.
I think to manage the China-Japan-Korea relations, trilateral relations based on the cooperation is very crucial. So I hope that in the past, the three countries actually play a key role to make the region dynamic and cooperate. So I hope that we can, FTA, cooperations, many areas we can do. So use this trilateral to improve the bilateral. So that is probably one good choice at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. On North Korea, we should not be fooled by media focusing on it as almost US-North Korean confrontation or dialogue. No, North Korea is defying UN Security Council resolution for 9 times in a row and firing missiles and also doing nuclear tests. So it's international community as a whole versus North Korea. US is only a representative. We should not lose that sight. Thank you very much.
The North Korean nuclear issue takes time and patience, and we need to be patient, and we need to continue politically engage North Korea while we maintain our sanction. And that kind of two-track strategy is much better than pressure-only tactic. And I hope, that kind of a new approach can be implemented, which has not yet been implemented, by the United States and by other countries. Thank you.
We don't have any final decision or resolution, but it was very successful in terms of raising the issues and to find out and to identify where's the problem and what kind of issues should be dealt in urgent manner. But 1 year later, if we have another get-together in the second Tokyo Forum, I think it should be after US election. So maybe we could have better understanding who's right, who's wrong. Okay, thank you so much for your kind attention.